Kev here. At last I've got my voice back, so apologies there's not been any of these videos for the last week or two, but if I can't speak then it's going to make for a pretty bad croaky video, yeah, and I don't want to be a frog. So anyway, video 8, what's it all about? If we have a look at the spec, physical causes and human causes of water insecurity. So there's natural factors, and you know, I'll be referring to an understanding of physical geography and the stuff you've studied so far in key areas 1 and 2, and I'll be referring back to that to help explain reasons, physical reasons for water insecurity and water availability. And then on the other side of the seesaw, there's the human causes. So what do countries, governments, TNCs, domestic users, industry, agricultural users, what do they all do that, generally speaking, reduces water availability as well? Because it's not just about the quantity of the water available. If it's polluted, then obviously it's not going to be available. So they can have an impact on the quality, which has an impact on the quantity as well. Yeah, so we are going to start off looking at a few maps. And like I say, a lot of it will consolidate the theory that you've already done. Human factors, 5.7b. And then we'll get on to, like, where does this demand come from? Where's the pressure and rising demand coming from? And why globally a country's becoming more thirstier. Alright, so what you're going to learn in a nutshell: physical factors that affect water availability and supply, human factors that often reduce water availability. These two things together create water insecurity. The difference between physical and economic scarcity, we're just going to jot those meaning of those key terms down. Why is demand for water rising globally? And also, though, why does the cost or the price of water vary across the planet? And it kind of links into all these factors just here. Alright then, give it a title. If you need to pause because you've got to write, then do it now. Physical and human factors affecting water insecurity is your title. And I want to kick off by defining two key words. So physical scarcity, this occurs when a country is using more than 75% of its water stores and flows. So when a country uses, let's do be a bit lazy, 75% of its natural water stores and flows. So thinking back to very first lesson on this topic, water stores could be aquifers, could be lakes, for instance. Flows, you're probably thinking in terms of rivers, streams, tributaries, that kind of thing. So if a country is using more than 3/4 of what's there, then it's got a physical scarcity. Economic scarcity is when the use of the stores and flows is limited or restricted by finance, technology, and governance. So what that's saying is they've got the physical supply, but often they can't access it. Yeah? So economic scarcity occurs due to lack of finance. Remember, we're A-level geographers, please don't say money. Yeah, you know, when I go to a casino, I spend money. Governments, you know, they don't really spend money. They spend GDP, they finance projects from central banks and things like that. So just be careful with terminology. You know, I can't think of an example in an A-level geography question where, you know, it'd be right to use the word money, really, if you're talking in terms of governments and key players. So lack of finance, water technology, infrastructure, So if you've got to get your water from a reservoir and you've got to pipe it thousands of miles, then if you've not got the investment and the technology to do that, then that's an example of economic scarcity as well. And hopefully we've not got idiots in charge. Unfortunately, we probably have actually, but never mind. Governance. Now, governance can obviously, national governments have a key role in that, but also maybe more regional and local governments as well. Yep, they can do certain things. They can decide to invest resources into solving water supply issues, or they can decide to privatise water supplies, which we'll have a look at as well later on. Right then. Subheading: physical factors affecting water insecurity or water availability. Well, again, links back to your theory. Rainfall levels, your inputs, yeah? I mean, if you think of and how latitude can affect that. So we're going to have a look at a map in a minute, but subtropical high pressure belts, typical latitudes between 23 to 35 degrees north and south of the equator. Naturally these regions, because the high pressure belts are semi-arid to arid, so parts of Australia, South Africa, the Middle East, countries like Israel, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, southwest USA, states like Arizona, for instance. Naturally, they're just desert environments. Parts of Mexico, North Africa in particular, and we'll have a look at these on a map. But these are all places or regions in subtropical eyes where there's just a lack of rainfall naturally. Some countries or continents are large and they have large continental interiors, not close to any oceans, and they have what's called a continental climate. Depends on latitude again, but generally speaking, continental climates tend to be drier than maritime climates. And an example of a maritime climate would be, for instance, New Zealand, island nation surrounded by ocean. The UK, we're affected by prevailing winds blowing from over the Atlantic Ocean from the southwest, which brings a lot of rainfall. So maritime climates tend to experience more rainfall and more inputs, or higher inputs, whereas parts of Central Asia, for instance, Central Australia, as well as having, experiencing high pressure, they're also, away from the oceans, so they're drier. Yep. And another thing is just the luck of the draw, really. Some countries just have very few easily accessible blue water stores and flows. So countries like Libya, not many major rivers and lakes. Algeria, yeah. Obviously, some of these are linked. Lack of rainfall, you're not going to get as many river systems, are you? So yeah, but some countries just don't have easily accessible blue water to access. Okie pokey, right, I've got a few maps here, let's have a look. But yeah, if you're thinking of the term water security or water insecurity, then what is it a combination of? Well, I like my little seesaw. On the one side, it's these physical factors, what I've just discussed, yeah? So, uneven physical availability across the planet. Some countries have got a lot of fresh water, some countries haven't. So, the distribution's uneven, but also the kind of trends moving forward. Yeah, we've got to be, as geographers, confident in hypothesizing about the future. So, this word diminishing supplies, climate change, climate change, laughing at me sad joke, sorry. Climate change is undoubtedly going to affect the distribution of precipitation in the future, of soil moisture and losses out of a drainage basin. So yeah, in some places it's going to be diminishing and getting even worse. All right. So on one side of the seesaw, there's your inputs. On the other side, there's, well, who's causing the demand? What are people doing that are increasing demand? Which sectors? Yeah, domestic, agriculture, and industry. And also, what are people doing? Maybe mismanaging water supplies, or polluting water supplies. All these things cause this seesaw to be unbalanced. All right. But like all geographers, we love maps, don't we? So let's just give this a blast for a sec and get some room. Right. We'll start with. This is where replace knowledge comes in very handy. Try explaining the patterns for physical and economic water scarcity without referring to places or knowing your way around a map. You're going to struggle. If we start with physical scarcity, the regions in red, southwestern states in the USA like Arizona, northern Mexico. Then we've got North Africa, like I said, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco. The Middle East in general, Saudi Arabia, northern China, be specific with this, northern China, and Central Asian countries. Yep. Parts of India, if the monsoon arrives late, that can provide a physical scarcity. Because India, you think of India as a country, really humid and rainy. Well, yeah, it is, but that's only 4 months of the year when the monsoon arrives. If it doesn't arrive or it arrives late, then physical scarcity can take place in India. And then this kind of region in Australia, like I say, away from the coastline. Countries that have an abundance of freshwater sources, and we're going to look at a couple of these, not all of them. South America as a continent, convectional rainfall. Yep. Generally speaking, the Amazon, the drainage density, the number of major rivers in South America is far greater than any other continent, and the discharge of those rivers, it's the continent that has the highest discharge. Where does that water come from? Well, obviously it's got to come from either rain or snow melt. Yeah. Canada. I fly over Canada quite often on my way to the Rocky Mountains when I go on holiday, and the one thing you notice if you look out the window when you fly over Canada is, number one, it's huge and you can be flying over it for 4 or 5 hours, and number two, the amount of freshwater lakes, it is just unbelievable. Yeah, and when you fly over, if you ever get the chance to fly over it, just look out the window, you just see green and lakes. Yeah, land and lakes, that's what Canada is. So they've got an abundance of fresh water. The UK, again, maritime climate affected by the prevailing winds coming from the Atlantic, also relief rainfall as well. Countries on the equator, again, in the ITCZ, low pressure belt, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, very humid, warm and wet climates. Japan, maritime climate as well. Southern China has quite high inputs as well. New Zealand. Yep. If we move on, so that's the physical, kind of working around the physical factors. If we think of economic scarcity, so countries that have stores, freshwater stores, but can't access it. Yeah, they can't transport it. They can't get to it. I've just put a little fact here. Africa as a continent, approximately 1 billion people, they've got the physical availability. They've got the rivers. They've got the lakes. They might have got the groundwater, but they can only access 25% of it due to water infrastructure, water technology, and funding. Yeah, that's the main case study with that. I mean, some more poverty-stricken countries like Costa Rica in Latin America, Central America as well. What else we got here? Northern India and Pakistan, again, economic scarcity. But yeah, Africa's your main example of economic water scarcity. If you just remember that with a bit of evidence just in this box, happy days. Yeah. The future then, obviously, you need to be making notes as we go, and I'm not talking about referring to every country, but the ones that I've given an overview of, based on your geography and your understanding from Key Area 1 and 2, a lot of this should be making sense. Yeah, so we need to be explaining why some countries have a physical scarcity, some countries don't. The future, if we have a look at this pattern, because you could get a question on future scarcity as well. Right, what we got? Well, ratio of withdrawals to supply. So who's predicted or projected to use demand more water than what's supplied naturally? USA and Mexico. Again, USA, largest economy. Mexico's developing at quite a rapid rate. South Africa, they're at this latitude of 35 degrees south, so not got a vast supply, and they're developing as well. Australia, what else we got? China, no surprises there. India, Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa. Yeah. Also, what's interesting, countries just outside that 30, just a bit further north than the 35 degrees north. Spain, your Mediterranean countries that have quite warm climates, they're predicted to get more arid, yeah, less rainfall, and these are pretty developed economies. If you think, rely on tourism, a lot of them. Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Turkey, yeah, their inputs aren't quite as high, but the use is probably predicted to rise. All right, so yeah, might get a question on future as well. Right then, human factors then, that give it a subheading: human factors, what can affect water quality, which then means we can't actually use that water, so it affects the quantity available. Yeah. Little case study examples. I don't need stack loads of facts and figures for this. I'd rather have a bit of a spread, be able to name drop 4 or 5 countries and describe what's happening. So we'll take a look at a few of them. I mean, the big one is pollution. Yeah. Got some beautiful pictures here, by the way, folks. I mean, pollution into rivers, river pollution. China is a case study example. Historically, I think they're cleaning up their act a little bit more recently, but NIC, they prioritised economic development. Chinese rivers, well, many of them grade 4 and grade 5, which means you can't even use the water to irrigate crops. It's that polluted. Yeah, so a little bit of evidence there. Grade 4 and grade 5 rivers, that it means you can't even use the water for irrigation. It's that polluted. Industry has been industry's a big polluter globally, but also pesticides and fertilizers that run off from agriculture leach and find their way into rivers. Arizona and Mexico in particular, if you put chemicals on the land, then if you use chemicals to try and kill pesticides and make your crops go quicker, those chemicals eventually find their way into the soils and into the rivers. Domestic pollution as well is a big problem. Awareness of this is actually on the rise at the minute, with the media getting involved with plastics in the oceans and things. It's all linked, folks. I mean, look at the state of this. Developing countries in particular, they've not got the water infrastructure or the sanitation to clean up and treat the sewerage. So what happens? Yeah, overpopulated, urbanised areas. Where do they do the business? Probably in a river. Yeah. Countries like Lagos in Nigeria, Indonesia, developing countries have a problem with domestic pollution. What else we got? Pakistan and Bangladesh, unsustainable use and over abstraction of rivers and of aquifers. And it's estimated that there are around 3 million illegal wells in Pakistan and India alone. So, these wells, most of them aren't actually government funded and government regulated. They're illegal, but people, want to access a water supply. They build their own pumps, their own wells in the villages, but the water table is falling. Yeah, getting a cone of depression because these aquifers are being over abstracted faster than what they're allowed to replenish naturally. And if we do that, obviously, the impact on the future, if it's unsustainable, is going to mean that the water supply the availability is reduced. The next one, saltwater incursion, a side effect of over abstracting from aquifers near the ocean, is if you take a look in this example on the left, we've got fresh water, right? And then we've got a margin that splits the fresh groundwater from the salty groundwater. Yep. And we abstract or pump fresh water out. There's going to be some recharge naturally, yep, where water infiltrates and percolates. But if we carry on doing it, what happens is that saltwater margin moves inland, and then we start abstracting and pumping out salty water. Yep. So water table drops, we get a cone of depression, so we have to dig, or we have to pump down deeper, if you like, to get the water out, but the salt water mixes with the fresh water. California is one example of that. Yeah, so human actions that reduce the quality and are unsustainable in the long run. Right then, a little bit, we're going to read quite an in-depth article in class and make some detailed notes on this. I'm just going to introduce it now, folks. We are going to do this in class. You might want to just jot a few things down. But yeah, my little seesaw again. Uneven supply of fresh water versus rising demand. So what's causing the rise in demand? Let's have a nosy. If we have a look at this graph, it's quite startling, really. If we look at the historical trend for water demand and water usage, we can see it's increased and it's carrying on increasing. That's the trend. Yeah. If we break it up a little bit further, that's the total water demand globally. But if we now break it up, then agriculture is the biggest user globally. Yep. We've got industry second, and then right at the bottom is domestic. All right, so, and we're going to look at the reasons for that in class. But agriculture we've looked at channel irrigation on the Nile, where they just flood fields. Very unsustainable because your outputs and your evaporation are really high. Yeah. But also, it's not just developing countries like Egypt what do this. The state of Colorado is particularly bad for it. The USA is a more developed country, but yeah, Colorado in particular, Western Colorado, a lot of agriculture, and it's much cheaper from a water technology point of view to just pump the water out, flood the fields. Micro irrigation, for instance, is very expensive, so farmers are reluctant to invest in that. Industry. If you look at this graph, water use by different regions in the world, there's obviously a link between level of development and water use. North America, world's largest economy, by far and away uses the most water for industrial use. Japan, it's a single country by itself. Look how significant that its use is. It's really high. We use water in manufacturing of high-tech products like laptops, mobile phones, motor cars, computer parts. Japan's got a really high-tech economy. It's really thirsty user of water in the making of those products. Western and Eastern Europe, again, quite developed, big user. And the Middle East, a lot of OPEC countries use water in the process of extracting oil. If you look at the ones that don't use a lot for industry, they're the most probably less developed places. Central Africa, hardly anything. Southeastern Africa, hardly anything. North Africa, hardly anything. Developing countries in Asia, not using much. So it's really this industrial water use is obviously linked to the stage of development. And I've put a cheesy little tagline here to help you remember. Water is the source of life for domestic users. Yep. If you've not got water to drink, to clean, for sanitation, it's going to result in disease and death and malnutrition. So it's important for domestic users, but it's also the lubricant of development, right, in industry and agriculture. And we're going to look at some of these reasons in more depth when we read the article in class. Right then, a little bit on why does the price of water vary globally? And if we just have a look at the typical cost of 50 litres of water in different parts of the world as a percentage of someone's typical daily salary, UK 0.1%, it's a fraction. Yep. Ethiopia 15%, 45% in India, 108% in Cambodia. So in some parts of the world, 50 litres of water costs more than what you earn. Yep. India, half of your daily wage would buy 50 litres of water. Alright? Why does the price vary so much then? Well, it's a combination of factors, so you will need to make notes on this, folks. Why does the price of water vary globally? First thing is the costs of obtaining the water and transporting it from the source area where the supply is to the area of consumption. Alright? That includes costs such as pipelines and water infrastructure, canals, pumping stations, reservoirs and the technology in reservoirs quite often to actually get that water out. For instance, Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam, it's got 3 pumps actually in or under the water level that you can't see, and they've had to be tunnelled through the rock, and then they pop up from the base of the reservoir, and they can pump it out that way. So all that investment costs money that somebody has to pay for. So the cost of obtaining, storing and transporting water and getting it from the source area to where it's used. Yep, that's one. Two, it's economics. It's a case of supply and demand. Yep. If a country is rapidly industrialising and the demand for water is increasing, then obviously the price is going to increase. Let's have a look. So yeah, it's a combination of supply and demand. So if we have a look at this, just pick a few countries. Water pricing. Canada. The light blue bars shows consumption, dark blue bars show price. So like I said with Canada, it's the country of freshwater lakes, folks. They've got an abundance of physical freshwater sources. So they can use a stack load of it. There's lots of it, so that therefore the price is cheap. Yep, easy. The US, again, they use a lot. Some might argue that they're actually unsustainable with that use. And they've probably actually already funded the infrastructure quite a while ago, so the price is quite cheap. If we have a look at Germany, for instance, this is quite interesting. Belgium, France, Netherlands, they're not consuming as much, but the price is a little bit more expensive. And obviously there's a push at the minute to manage water supplies sustainably. One way of doing that is you can make it more expensive for people. You can put people on water meters, for instance. You can put companies on water meters. If you make something more expensive, chances are they're going to be more careful with how they use it. Other factors that affect price. So we've got physical cost of obtaining, storing and transporting it. The supply and demand factor. The less you've got and the more demand there is, the more expensive it's going to be. It's simple economics. How much... If your water quality is not very good, then you're going to need investment in cleaning it, right? Again, expensive. So, the infrastructure that delivers the clean water to the areas that are demanding it. If your water supply is not polluted, then that's going to be cheaper. But just think, sewerage works, treatment centres in this country, in the UK, we need to invest in things like that. And the last one is kind of the government and their attitudes towards water. So in the UK, for instance, we've kind of gone through two different periods, really. One where things were nationalised, which just means the government runs services. So once upon a time, the train systems and the railways were nationalised. The government of this country employed the train drivers, employed people in the public sector to run the trains. Same with gas and electric. When we had coal-fired power stations, governments employed people to kind of run that. Water companies were under government control, and then gradually there's been this kind of era of privatisation where the government sold off assets to private companies that then run the water system and the water infrastructure, but the government regulate what they can and can't do. Yeah, so there's pros and cons for each. It's a very political kind of argument, and there's pros and cons for each. You know, some people thought the trains were better when they were nationalised. Some people think they're better now that they've been privatised. Same with water as well. Yeah, but yeah, governance within a country, how they see the running of that country and its services. Yeah. And we're going to have a look at that in lesson as well. So, right, a lot there, folks. It was a bit more of a lecture. I hope you've been pausing it and making notes where you need to. I'll see you next lesson. Adios.